Hi, I'm Tori Hagaman. Welcome to my studio. The Oakleaf Hydrangea are in full bloom here in North Carolina, and they are just stunning. The other day I just caught some photographs where light was filtering down through those magnificent leaves. They were really lit up, and I thought, oh, I'd love to capture that on canvas if I can. So I am using a large 30 by 30 canvas. I'm going to do this painting in oil, and I have struggled with oil. Maybe you've never tried it, or maybe you have tried it and it's been a problem child for you as well. That's why I paint in acrylics a lot, but gosh, I just love the effect that you can get with oils. So I'm not going to do any fancy editing with this video. I'm just going to paint. I'm going to let you see close-up brushwork. You'll see the colors I'm using. I'm going to talk with you as I go through this painting. Because it's so large, I will speed up and edit out large pieces. But I want you to really see how I'm using the brush, how I'm getting in the layers, and help maybe take some of the mystery out of doing a large painting in oil. If you're interested, I sure hope you'll stay tuned. The canvas that I'm using is from DickBlick, and it's a Blick Premier. It's a traditional profile, meaning that the thickness of it is not the super thick. I have used the real thick before in a canvas this size, and gosh, it is so darn heavy. It's just really hard to wield. I like that it's got a sharp corner rather than a rounded corner. It makes it much easier to paint the sides. And I really like the back of it. It's really finished. I think it's beautiful on the back, and it's very professional looking. So this is the type of canvas that I use almost exclusively. I actually did a video on a hydrangea bush. I did it several years ago. It's been one of my most popular videos, but it was done in acrylic. The color palette was very different, and the focus was more on the flowers, where this painting is going to be more about the leaves. So I think they're going to be two very different looking paintings, but you might want to check that one out as well. I'll put a link to it at the end of the video. I'm just using a piece of chalk, and I'm putting in a real loose drawing, just focusing on the main leaves and just having things go off the canvas. I like that look a lot. So very loose drawing to get started. I was having such a hard time seeing the chalk. I thought there's no way you'll be able to see it on video. So I went back over my drawing with a Vines charcoal. And I didn't even notice this in the photograph, but there was a little birdhouse I knew the birdhouse was there, but it was so hidden by the leaves and flowers, I'd kind of forgotten it. So I did a little simple drawing of that as well. Little surprise. In my mind, those leaves were a very yellow green, but as I looked more at the photograph, I thought that's just not right. I went out and took a leaf and brought it back in with me, and to my great surprise, it wasn't even close to what I had put on the canvas. So I ended up with sap green, ultramarine, yellow oxide, and cad yellow, and I made up some piles of this bluer green, having some very darks to very lights, adding more yellow and even a touch of white. I'm using a Rosemary & Company classic long flat that's pretty worn and pretty loved, so it's got kind of a rough end. You know, when I originally was thinking about this painting, I was going to do a very thin layer at first, and then go over it with a thicker layer, and then finally do some really thick paint at the end. But the painting is so large, I just decided once I started getting into it, I thought I'm going to do this painting in sections, and rather than doing thin layers thinned out with turpentine or Gamsol, I'm just going to go ahead and use a medium thickness of paint and just go ahead and put it on that way, and do one leaf at a time and not try to worry about doing the whole canvas. I knew I was not going to be able to do this painting in one sitting since it was so large. But you'll notice I'm just able to pick up, since I have pre-mixed my colors, my darks up to my very lights, I'm able to look at my photograph and just go into those different piles and just put it in as I see it. And it was so, I really encourage you, particularly on a large painting, if you have your colors pre-mixed, it makes it so much more simple. You'll notice I changed brushes. I picked up a Staccato Creative Mark size 8 long flat. That's one of my favorite brushes, and it has a more defined edge to it, and I just felt like I needed that on the edges of the leaves. I wanted to get something a little sharper there, so that's why I switched over. One of my favorites. I wanted to slow this down and let you see this brush work. I like that brush because I can turn it on its side and get a sharp edge where I want to. But you see this value shift. That's why I love, when particularly doing something large like this, to go ahead and mix your piles. It's just too easy to end up with a flat looking painting if you don't have some strong enough value shifts. And I can just go to my different piles, plop in a dark, plop in a light. You know, some of these I was looking at my photograph, but a lot of them I just started kind of making it up. I wanted to have, I remember the thing that attracted me to this scene in the beginning was the fact that there were such strong lights and such strong shadows. So I just wanted to make sure that I was getting that effect with this painting. And I'm not cleaning my brush in between. I'm just picking up different piles, letting it kind of blend together. It doesn't really matter. Oil paint's going to blend a little bit anyway. But I just wanted you to see how I was doing this. It wasn't rocket science. I was just adding different lights and darks and really getting that feeling of light filtering through the leaves. Here I'm adding in my darkest value, which is sap green, which is pretty dark on its own, but I'd added some ultramarine to it. You can get that combination almost black, depending on how much ultramarine you put in. But again, look at the contrast between that leaf I was just working on and the one that's at the top of the painting, how light that is. So I'm just building the whole painting that way, going through leaf by leaf. I don't want to bore you with that, but again, I just want to emphasize, be sure you get enough contrast, enough value shifts to keep it interesting and full of light. Here you can see just more leaves added. Those white circles are where I've allowed space for the flowers, but I've added in some veining through the leaves, and I just used a light khaki neutral color for that, just sort of like a stem color. Here I've mixed some colors to put in the background, the kind of dirt areas, and I've used like transparent red oxide, transparent brown, some of the sap green, and I put a fair amount of Gamsol in there. I thinned it down. It's already pretty thin with those transparent colors, but I just thinned it down, kind of scrubbed it into those areas in between the leaves to fill in some kind of dirt background areas. So I want to talk to you for a minute about what I think is a pretty critical stage in the painting, and that is getting an under stain on the middle of these hydrangea. And looking at this petal or this flower head, you'll notice when you see this outside in the sun, this area underneath looks just like a pale peach, and then you see this pale green, and then you see a few petals on top of it, but they're not solid petals, and you really see a lot of this undercoat. This is where I was using some of this brown and green with a lot of turpentine, and I got it into the flower head accidentally, and so I wiped it right back off. But I like how that looks stained, and I like how that looks like a shadow. So I might use that same color combination and stain some of these places where I feel like they are in shadow. And then I'm thinking about using this cad red light, might be a cad red medium, with a lot of turpentine, and just using that as a wash in the bottom, and then using a pale green in the top, and then put my petals on top. But I love, when I'm painting flowers, to get something on the bottom and then put petals on top of it. So we'll see how this goes. Here I've gone back to my Rosemary & Company rough brush, so I didn't want a real chiseled edge on these marks. I wanted it just kind of scrub it in. And I'm using a very thinned out mixture of the greens, the browns, the reds, those transparent colors, and I'm putting it on just scrubbing it in, and then I'm going back with a paper towel and just removing some of it. And that's a good way that you can get it as dark or as light as you want. You can go over it several times if you want to get that as deep as you'd like. But I wanted that area of the flower to look like there were leaves casting a shadow on it. So I wanted that to look particularly dark. So now I'm adding just a little bit of the brown, transparent brown oxide, just to make it a little deeper. And again, you could leave that like it is. You can go back in and wipe it off. Totally up to you. I think I did it in different levels of transparency, depending on if flowers were in a little more light or not. So you can just kind of play with that. Then I took my cad red light or medium, and again, I used Gamsol, and I got it super thin, and I scrubbed in just a pale coral peach color into that white section so that I could get just a little bit of glow underneath the petals. And that, again, I wasn't quite sure how intense that color was going to look. So it was thinned out quite a bit. And I went back and added a little more color here and there, just kind of playing with it until I got something that looked right. Because this is an underlayer, it's pretty much going to be what it's going to be. I mean, you could always go back over it with thicker paint if you didn't like it after the petals were on. But I have found that staining process is so beautiful to put things on top of it, but you're kind of, it is what it is. So if you're going to have that glow look, you need to just kind of put it on there, leave it alone, and then put your petals on top. I'm going to speed it up a little bit more, but just wanted to talk a little more about this phase. At the top there, I'm using a real thinned out cadmium green with a lot of Gamsol. And here you can see me putting a little more paint, a little less Gamsol, just to get a little stronger glow in the center. A nice base. Here I'm starting to add the petals on the hydrangea, and I've dropped down to a smaller filbert brush, which has a rounded edge. I'm turning that brush, trying to get some petals. Remember that our flower is not very solid looking. It actually has a lot of space. And I'm going to save you a lot of wear and tear because I painted it that way where there was a lot of the green and the coral showing through, and I didn't like the result. I felt like it just looked odd. And this is a great example of sometimes you can paint something the way it looks, but it doesn't translate well into a painting. So I ended up filling in the flowers more. But that said, I'm still glad I had that underglow because it did give a nice warm glow to the flowers that I would not have had if that was just white on white. So it was still a good idea to have an underglow. You'll also notice I use the same browns to put in stems, and that's a place where I put in some ultramarine with the brown to get it in shadow, and some yellow oxide to lighten it. So I think the stems were an important part of this painting as well. Hey, if you would like more intentional, slower, complete instruction, I've got some great courses and shorter tutorials on my website. Would love for you to check that out. Clouds, flowers, landscapes, all kinds of cool things waiting for you there. Thank you again for watching. God bless.